This is The Changed Physician, episode 145. Welcome back to The Changed Physician. I am Melissa Katie, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with our lovely returning guest, Dr. Kelly Casperson. Thank you for joining us today again.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we couldn't wait. We had to just jump into sex for our episode. I mean, it just only made sense with your podcast. And if you have not, for the listeners, if you have not listened to the original story of Dr. Casperson, please go back and listen to that episode. She is a podcaster of You Are Not Broken. But we decided to just title this episode Sex for obvious reasons and to get you to start listening. So
I guess do spoken word poetry just about sex. You're welcome, people. Thanks for listening.
Lovely. So just to start off with, first of all, I know you started the podcast and it kind of related to, we'll have to go back and listen to the episode for all the details, but I guess it's not like you had to do the podcast, but as far as your episodes and how they transitioned and talking about sex, what were the first things about sex people wanted to know that you put out there before we jump into things people should know about sex?
Oh yeah, well, you just being in practice every day and like talking to women, you just say the same things over and over and over again, right? And then you just kind of feel like a broken record.
Yes.
And women would tell me their stories, and then I'd look at them and I'd say, "You're not broken." And like I just kept saying it over and over and over again, and I'm like, well, that's the name of the podcast, like very naturally, right? Because women come in, they take all this pressure on themselves, right? They just think there's something wrong with them, and like, who do you really ask to make sure you're not broken, right? There's nobody. Most people don't know about sex therapists. Shout out to sex therapists; they're amazing. They'll tell you you're not broken. But these women come in and basically I'm like, how come everybody feels so shitty about this, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started, and again, what we were talking about before of like, I was told that women were just too complicated. And like, I bought that for a while until I was like, is it actually true, right? I mean, like, where does all this misinformation come from? Because we all think like we didn't get a sex education. Oh, you got a sex education. It was just crappy, right? Yeah. Like Hollywood, media, music. Think of every single love song. Like that spontaneous desire, rip your clothes off. And then you're like, well, I've been with this person for like 15 years and that's really not how it is. Does that mean I'm not in love? Right? Like, how do you question that stuff? So I just started going into like that and wanting to educate women and then realize having my mind blown. Like I saw a a model of the clitoris like 4 years ago. And I'm like, that's not right. I didn't learn that in surgery. Right? And I'm like, I'll be damned. That's what a clitoris actually looks like. Didn't get taught, don't remember that in med school or residency. So like really a new education for me. And then realizing like once I had all the knowledge, realizing like other people still don't. So what am I going to do with all this knowledge? And started to share it. But yeah, there's so many myths. Getting back to your question of like what women should know. Oh, responsive desire is different than spontaneous desire, and responsive desire is normal. Only 20 to 30% of women actually have orgasms by putting things in their vagina.
Yeah.
That we call sex, penis and vagina is our only narrow definition of sex. So like we've just left out the woman having an orgasm basically 70% of the time. Yeah. And then she thinks there's something wrong with her. Right. Clitoral stimulation is how women have orgasms. Like people don't even know that, right? You're like, that's the penis. The penis and the clitoris aren't self-lubricating, so we need to use lube. Like normalizing lube, normalizing vaginal estrogen and perimenopause and beyond. So that's just like my laundry list of like things people need to know. Sex education 101.
So it's fascinating because you were saying how people are so hard on themselves. And it sounds reminiscent of a lot of times, and I'm not just female physicians, but physicians in general, but obviously you brought up some female things, but many times we're hard on ourselves for not doing a great job as a physician, but you think you're high achieving and you can do all these things and accomplish and be successful in all these things, but yet in the sex department, you may not feel like you are as, high achieving as maybe some areas of your life. And because they don't get the education that is probably good enough because they get the standard medical education. You just said there's a lot of things you didn't learn and you're in this field. So it's interesting that a lot of people that are listening, whether you're a physician or not, there's a lot of us that can gather a lot of important information on maybe proper ways of, or better ways of going about increasing your sex drive or putting yourself in a better scenario, or doing certain things, lubricant and all these other things you're talking about. So I just wanted to emphasize that this applies to everyone, and no one should be left out.
Everyone. Totally. And I mean, I think even you bring up a good point of like, why are we even comparing ourselves to any standard? Like, where's the gold standard on libido, right? Yet here we are being like, is mine too high? Is mine too low? Mine compared to this person? Mine compared to my, my spouse's? And we're always comparing. And it's like your sex life and your sexuality are your unique identifier. And here we go around being like, well, is it a certain number of times a week? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? And you're like, no, quality over quantity, people, right? But people really care, like, what's normal? Like, we're always comparing ourselves. And like, that is an orgasm pleasure killer. So it's like, there is no comparison or like bar that you should reach. It's like, if you're happy with your sexuality and your sex life, God bless you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we compare all the time. And a lot of women will do that. They'll compare themselves to their girlfriends or compare themselves to the sex drive of their significant other who has 10 times the amount of testosterone in their body usually, right? So it's like, it doesn't mean you're broken. Low desire is like, to me, I'm like, it's just a comparison. That's just your desire. Now there's things we can do to take some stuff off your plate to let your normal sexuality maybe bubble up. Right. And I think a lot of high achieving women, they're jam packed, man. They've got jobs, they've got kids, they're organizing something. They're volunteering at the school. Maybe they've got elderly parents. They're cognitive. They're in their frontal lobe all the time. Orgasms don't live in your frontal lobe. Orgasms live when you turn your frontal lobe off. And that's really where that mindfulness, getting embodied. And we're not light switches, right? We're like, go, 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 go. Take a second to like get into, okay, I want to be a sexual being now, right? Because so many women, they bring that energy, that sympathetic nervous system into the bedroom, and they're like, hey, I just can't get into it. So you got to get your body into this parasympathetic state to get relaxed, to be like, I need 20 minutes to myself. I got to go do some yoga. I got to go take a bath. I got to go read something sexy, like whatever it is, because we're not light switches. But media will tell you that we are, right? So we feel broken.
Yeah. And media did a good job about that. Just, I mean, when it comes to sex, they think that, all of a sudden there's this, like, I love that light switch analogy that you use. And then you're in the whatever elevator, ripping off clothes and whatever kind of absurd things they're doing, or on the beach. I'm like, it's sandy.
Yeah. And Hollywood's very notorious for penis and vagina sex, the only type of sex. There's no clitoral stimulation. Her orgasm with penis and vagina sex is in about 30 seconds. Like, it's very misleading of how female sexuality actually works. So, porn again tends to be male centric. They're creating a product for a male audience. So again, it tends to leave out a lot of female normal function. So we really have nowhere to turn to be like, am I normal? And then when you realize you are normal, well, how the hell do I start that conversation with this guy? Because he thinks I'm broken too, right? So like, now you got to get into like communicating with your partner about it. So my podcast is about that. And then I got into menopause because I just kept hearing over and over, women are like, ever since menopause. And I'm like, what's the data show, right? What's the data say about menopause? And it's like, turns out you've got these 60, 70, and 80-year-olds having fantastic sex, right? So it's not the menopause that's doing it. The two biggest indicators of a woman stopping having sex after menopause is menopause symptoms and availability of a partner. And I'm like, well, I can't fix the second one. But I can educate on menopause, because if she doesn't have hot flashes, she's sleeping better, her anxiety is better, and her vagina's not painful, she might want to have sex more, right? So it's not menopause that does it, it's the menopause symptoms and those being untreated. So like, we were talking about earlier about like, what's the podcast done for, what else has come into my life? Now I'm menopause certified, because I'm like, I better learn about menopause to help people have sex after menopause.
Wait, go ahead, Kevin.
There was a term that you used very, you just slotted out, like you're just like blah 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 blah, right? That's what you get when you're an expert, and they're like this and this and this, and it was your term about desire, and you said there was a difference between responsive desire and spontaneous desire. So can you kind of develop because I think is a big misnomer.
it would be great, like when I design like sex ed, right? Whenever that happens. But like this is a very important concept for people of like desire is two types. Spontaneous, which is your Hollywood, that's your 18-year-old, that's your, testosterone at 800. That's like, I don't know who I'm gonna sleep with, but I'm gonna do it pretty soon. I gotta go find a mate, right? Like that's like a spontaneous desire. I gotta go do something with this, right? I'm gonna seek it out. That's spontaneous desire. Men stereotypically tend to have more spontaneous desire as likely a result of two things. Number one, testosterone. Number two, social conditioning, right? Men are allowed to desire things. Men are allowed to be sexual beings. Women really don't have that in our society when you look at how women are socialized, right? If women desire sex, they're actually called bad names. There's words for those women, right? So again, like when a woman's trying to explore her sexuality, well, you don't want to desire too much because then you're that person, right? So how we're socialized really does influence how we kind of celebrate our sexuality growing up. So that's spontaneous desire. The myth is you should always have spontaneous desire. And I think that's where a lot of women feel very broken because they're like, I need more desire. I need spontaneous desire. And you're like, and so then I'm like, do you actually need desire at all? Like, it's not actually a part of the ingredient of, if you read Magnificent Sex, which is an amazing book by Peggy Kleinpatz, she interviews all these people who like are self-declared, like, I have magnificent sex. Nobody says it's because I have desire. Like, it's literally not even an essential ingredient. And here we are not having sex because we don't have spontaneous desire, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm like, coffee is like coffee beans and water. You have to have both of them to have coffee. You don't even need desire to have amazing sex. And so I really liked, and that's what the book is about, is like explaining desire. And then kind of at the end of the book being like, you realize you don't even need to, people are sitting around waiting for spontaneous desire when it doesn't exist. Go have great sex. And if you have great sex, desire, well, you're going to want to do it again. And at my hypothesis, a lot of people's hypothesis is women are just having really shitty sex to begin with. Of course they're not desiring it. Mm-hmm. Going back again to putting things in our vagina doesn't give us orgasms. We really have to pay attention to the clitoris, the labia, all of our pelvic structures, all of our body, actually. So we're having shitty sex. We think we're broken because we don't have spontaneous desire. We're not spontaneously desiring melted ice cream, right? It's like, give me the good ice cream. I'll want it again. Give me melted ice cream. I'll never eat it. Mm-hmm. And so responsive desire is really, you're in a long-term monogamous relationship. You know everything about that person. It's not novel, right? That dopamine seeking is really like novelty. Dopamine goes to get you to seek novelty, and you don't have that in a long-term monogamous relationship, but you're having good sex and you're like, oh yeah, this is good. I like this. That's your responsive desire. Like you're into it, but like you forget about it because you've got other stuff going on for the majority of your life. That's totally normal. And I always like try to clarify that for people. I'm never telling people to like go have sex because when you don't want it. I'm saying like have great sex. Then you'll want more of it. Like, and just that's what it's all about. It's not kind of sitting around waiting for desire. It's not an essential ingredient.
Is it sort of like, it makes me think of like exercising in some ways, right? Because I always think it's like the key to exercise is just doing it, right? Yeah. Because it's always the night before you're like, oh, I'm going to exercise tomorrow morning. Then tomorrow morning comes and you're like, but then you do it and then you're like, So
I use exercise a lot, and I use eating vegetables a lot in my kind of sex analogies. Because I'm like, I want to eat vegetables in my life. I want to have that as part of my life, but I do not spontaneously desire it. But like when I'm eating a tasty salad, I'm like, this is pretty good. Right. But I don't tend to like want to be seeking out tasty salads. Yeah. And same with exercise, and then again with exercise, realizing again, it's mostly about your mind, right? And like getting that mind work right. And to be like, I want to incorporate exercise into my life, so I'm going to prioritize it. Exercise isn't going to spontaneously, accidentally happen. Like I want to set aside time to devote to exercise. And so you set aside time devoted to the possibility of intimacy with your partner. It doesn't mean a forced, like, you need to have an orgasm now. We've got a half an hour. Because again, frontal lobe, cortisol, sympathetic nervous system, it's not going to work that way. But to be like, let's just hang out together for like 45 minutes. Maybe we'll get naked, see what happens. Maybe we'll fiddle around a little bit. Like no pressure, because really the pressure and the stress and the what we call performance, right? If it's performative, it's not going to be as pleasurable. And I think a lot of people make sex very performative.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so like a performance anxiety type of scenarios, I assume what you're talking about. What in some of the life coaching that you've done all these extra trainings to kind of enhance your holistic approach to this whole sex thing. What are some of the things that your takeaways for people that, if they're having performance anxiety issues, like how do you guide them, or what are some of the things you remind them of?
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to like, sex really isn't for like reproduction at this point in most people's lives. Like it is sometimes, but like it's really play. Like sex is legitimately adult play, and we've forgotten how to play. Right. And then realizing like when you're getting anxious about it, be like, what are you making the sex mean? Are you making it validate like you're worried that if it doesn't go a certain way, you're unlovable? Are you like, and so we really dig when I coach people on it, is like digging down to be like, what are you making the sex mean? Like, why are you anxious? Right? Are you anxious maybe because you're getting older and some body parts just maybe aren't working as well as they used to? And do we need to see a doctor for that? And kind of working with stuff like that.
Yeah. And then when you talk about sex therapists, when would those kind of roles come in, and how does that work? Is it just talking, or is it participating?
Oh yeah. I always forget, like, cause I didn't realize this was a myth, but like now I have sex, bonus to podcasting, I have sex therapist friends like on the speed dial now, but like, which I didn't before. So they're like, the myth about sex therapists is that these are people watching you have sex. And I'm like, that's what people think sex therapists are? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, no wonder why they don't want to come and see you. But like, that's just talking. It's just basically like sex therapists are just therapists that are comfortable talking about sex, because just like doctors, therapists don't want to talk about sex either. Like people are legitimately marriage therapists and they don't want to talk about sex. And I'm like, it's kind of an important part in a lot of marriages. I haven't seen, I've looked for data, I have not seen it, the percentage of marriages that break up because of intimacy. Because what you start doing is you start avoiding all intimacy now, right? So like if a woman is feeling like she's being badgered, because he's like, well, 1 in 7 times she'll say yes, so I'm going to ask her like 11 times, right? And she's like, she's got a desire where sex this amount is awesome for her, but sex this amount is not awesome for her, right? So they start going to bed at different times. They stop holding hands. They stop doing any sort of like close touching. They stop cuddling on the couch because it might be always leading to sex and she doesn't want it that much, right? Or she's having crappy sex. She doesn't want it for that reason. So point being, like, I think a lot of relationships break up on account of money and sex. So we should talk about it more.
Yeah. Well, and that's getting into desire discrepancy.
Yeah.
Which
is normal. Again, going back to your exercise thing, like I like lifting weights and my husband loves running. You're not going to make me run more and have me love it, right? Like, and the other thing is like spaghetti and pasta or whatever. It's like, I like red sauce. They might like white sauce. Neither's wrong. Like you put two people together, there's a discrepancy in everything. Why wouldn't there be a sex discrepancy? And really normalizing that. And it's not the low desire person's job to rise to the high desires level. It's just not. The low desire is not the broken. They're not broken.
So is the gap filled by masturbation, or what do you usually suggest?
Yep. So it's either filled by masturbation or it's filled by, hey, can we be close and not have sex? Can we be like, because understanding what sex means for couples, right? For the man, does sex mean love? Does sex mean being close to somebody? Can he get that in a different way besides penetrative intercourse, right? Because he's like, I really need to have sex this much. Well, why? Because that's how I feel connected. Okay, well, good to know that, right? Like why people want sex, what sex means is super. You get a lot of information out that way. Yeah.
Is anyone brought up the topic about at what point it's being a sex addict, where it's like, really a problem, more of an escalated issue that needs to be dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any sort of addiction, right? If it's interfering with your job, if it's interfering with your life, if it's interfering with making a living, all that stuff, absolutely should bring it up. In that world, there's some people who think that sex was never an addiction, but I've talked to enough people that I'm like, sex really destroyed their life. Like they were going out doing behaviors, that it was just, how is that not something that they wish they had more control over?
Yeah.
And that's certainly out of my realm. I'm not going to go back and get my therapy PhD. There's enough just like simple stuff to work for the rest of my life. But yeah, for that stuff, it's like sex therapists. They're amazing. They're hard to come by.
Mm. Well, at least we know you in case we need to reach out for anybody.
Yeah. I think another thing just on the desire is like how many men think the female they're with is broken. Like they'll come to me and they'll be like, how do I fix her? I need her to have sex more. So, like, well, people feeling that their partner thinks they're broken is not sexy.
Yeah.
So I think men play a part, and they'll come in and they'll be like, I don't need to be involved. She's the broken one. And it's like, wow. Oh, well, that's telling.
That's not a good dynamic. Hey, Kevin, I have one last question before we finish this episode. You want me to spew it, or do you have something?
No, you can spew, and then then maybe I'd be able to have a chance to insert something in here, but I wasn't even trying to do an innuendo. I just
there was a couple there, but that's
no, that was totally unintended.
That's okay. It's appropriate. So
you got a bad mind.
I didn't say anything. It's all in your frontal lobe right now.
Yeah.
So the question I have for you, in light of that dynamic with that, husband saying or the man saying his girl is broken, what would you like? How would you explain for women or men about the clitoris and how the anatomy and how manipulating it, or what can be done to essentially create a better ice cream for women so it's not a horrible experience?
Yeah, I mean, first realizing that nobody ever got taught this, right? Like because females will blame the man. They're like, well, he doesn't know how to give me an orgasm. And it's like, well, did you teach him? Like, he doesn't even own the hardware.
Yeah.
Like, God bless, this guy's trying his best in most cases, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to put it again back on the woman is like, you got to know what feels good. You got to know what you want. You got to know what sex that you want to have is, right? And we are never given that permission, right? So here we are, middle age, maybe in a long-term monogamous relationship. Sex is way off the back burner because it was never good to begin with. You never had permission to enjoy yourself. And so when you ask people, what kind of sex do you want to have? It's actually a very difficult question for them to answer, I think. It's a much easier question to say, what kind of sex do you not want to have? They can start filling in that blank, right? Like, well, I feel disconnected. It's just super quick and he's over with it. Like, it's like he is not even paying attention to my body. So people will be like, they'll tell you what they don't want. And then you start filling in like, oh, okay, so maybe it could look like this. But yeah, just giving everybody permission to be like, this is about play and it's about pleasure. And if you aren't having equal pleasure, if you look at, this is something interesting to talk about, is the orgasm gap. The orgasm gap is what % of the time does each person in the couple have an orgasm, right? And the heterosexual relationship, the heterosexual female has the lowest amount of orgasms of any paired couple. Homosexual guy, they're doing great. Heterosexual man, he's doing great. Lesbian couples, they're doing pretty good. And then you have the heterosexual female, she's down here 30% of the time, 40% of the time she's having an orgasm. And then they think she's broken. Right. And it's like, well, the lesbians are having more orgasms. So it's not the body. And they actually did this data they quizzed bisexual women. So they took bisexual women and they said, what % of time do you have an orgasm when you're with a woman versus when you're with a man? I'm like, what a great randomized control trial. Like, that's brilliant. So when she's paired with a man, her rate of orgasm goes down.
Yeah. So that's interesting, though. Is it a woman that's willing to give themselves one by self-stimulating, or is it from the act of the other person? That's also would be an interesting question.
Right. You go. Keep the study going.
But another thing is that, a friend of mine who's OB-GYN, like, she was learning about the anatomy too, and she was surprised that, you think you just see this, of course, the clitoris is, different sizes and different people. And in some women that are going through transitioning, they might have it exposed and take some type of, testosterone, and gets hypertrophied, but there's that base of it that's hidden that you don't see too, that can be stimulating. Am I correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
people don't even know that women have erectile tissue, right? Like if I say like, oh, women have erectile tissue, that's what gives them orgasms. People are like, erectile tissue, right? But it's the same. We're just homologs, right? Men have nipples, men have breasts, right? We have similar parts. We have penises. We call them clitorises. So the other cool thing is like the clitoris is the only organ in the body whose sole job is pleasure. And then people are like, but the penis, and I'm like, penis has 3 jobs.
Yeah.
It's got to pee, it's got to deliver sperm to reproduce, and it gets to have erections and orgasms. But so the clitoris, just to do a quick anatomy, the tip of the iceberg is what you see. That's the glands. It actually has a body, like a structure that feels like a small penis. You can actually feel that if you explore it. Come up underneath the mons. Then you have the bulbs and the crura. It goes underneath the labia majora. The labia minora is also highly vascularized, arousable, erectile tissue. And then you get more erectile tissue coming down at the base of the vagina or the vestibule. All of it. So that's why vibration feels super good there, because you're stimulating the clitoris.
Yeah, that's big news alert for
big news.
Big news.
Didn't learn it in med school.
I feel like that was like a published study or something just recently, and like because I remember seeing a picture and it was like, oh my god, this thing's huge.
It's almost the same size as the average penis.
Yeah, it was big, like huge. But
almost the same size as the average penis.
It reminds me of like those drawings where you have to like see, there's a hidden, like not Where's Waldo, but like this hidden penis inside, so you just can't really see it. You have to kind of get behind the curtain, so to speak.
Totally. But I mean, that's why it's such a great this is why sex is such an amazing topic, right? Because you're like, you've got society, you've got relationships and communication, you've got anatomy you didn't even know. Like, it's such a crazy, amazing topic because you've got like all of this stuff, and it's like, you got a clitoris, you're literally carrying around the only organ of pleasure with you 24 hours a day. What do you want to do with that?
Right. And most women don't see it sticking out like men do, so they never touch it. And some men have this preconceived notion that women are masturbating when they're young all the time. And I bet you those percentages are very low because it's not staring them in the face. They're not grabbing it to go to the bathroom all the time.
Yeah, well, and how many women are told that it's not natural, that it's dirty, that it's shameful, right? Like you're not even gonna go touch it down there because you've made it mean all these things. So you really have to peel back those layers of like, we were intended evolutionary data is so, because you're like, why do we have a clitoris, like we can't go back and ask things, but it's interesting to think about is like it's actually on the outside, right? It's not deep on the inside, it's actually on the outside, with the theory being there's a lot of theories about this, but like the ones I like are like the woman needs to feel like this is a guy that she actually wants to like let inside and reproduce. He's got to know what he's doing. He's got to give her pleasure. It's a way to communicate his interest. Like the clitoris is actually quite important. We've just erased it and then called sex putting something in the vagina.
Yep. Such important messages.
Well, and all I can think is we're running out of time here, and we're gonna need you back for sex part 2 for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We're just gonna take an intermission.
We'll take
it's
an
a big topic.
It is a big topic.
I mean, this is literally like, you can understand why I actually don't like doing sex stuff as in clinic as a urologist. It's because here I am, like a woman's coming in, she's feeling broken, she's got pain. We didn't even talk about pain with sex, right? And here I am being all flip and be like, what do you need a penis in your vagina for anyways?
Well, and they're coming to you probably for this mechanical thing, like, put the key in and fix me, or give me the pill that fixes me, or do the procedure that fixes me. And what you have highlighted over and over again in these episodes is the fact that, it's the mind. The mind is the biggest pleasure organ of the body. Yeah. That's not something you're going to get in 15 minutes.
No, and you can't get a surgeon to go to freaking life coach school. Like, how woo-woo-y is that? Unless it's like I literally had to go figure out sex, because I'm like, I can tell you to use lube, but if all of these other things, right? So I had to like figure that out. But yeah, a lot of women come in, they're just like, I just need my vagina to not hurt so I can put the penis in it. Because their view of sex is him putting the penis in my vagina. And I'm like, I can't do this in 15 minutes. No. Here's the podcast. Go to a sex therapist. Here's some lube and some vaginal estrogen.
Yeah. that, I mean, like Kevin says, highlighting, putting your information out in the world so that they can, ingest the information on their own time and actually get a more full-scale education than what's available in 15 minutes.
Totally. I mean, I did not see this coming, as couples will listen to the podcast together and then talk about it. Like, I've been able to provide that platform, and then they get to be like, what do you think about, like, I get to be part of them starting a conversation about this. It's so cool.
It's awesome.
Super awesome. Yeah. Well, we should probably let you go. Otherwise we will tech for another 3 hours here, but we were going to have you back. I'm going to make you commit to that.
We'll do it. Yeah.
So did you have anything else there, Melissa, or should I take
No, go ahead. I think, it would be good to have another episode, maybe on, avoiding pain with intercourse or something like that, and other topics, but, we'll say
so
that.
Many topics. Yeah. So many topics.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a way we can do this without like outing ourselves, because I don't want to be like, oh, we need to talk about this. But
it's okay. I think all of the topics.
We'll have a hat or something. We'll draw out the things.
Yes.
We can put them in.
Yeah, we'll do asking for a friend episode.
I'm asking for a friend. I have this friend, and they're in the neighborhood, and I've been talking to them for a while.
Yeah, and we need to dive deep into this for my friend.
for my friend. I only see them once a year, but they really were asking about this. But so Kelly, it's so great talking to you. Really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. For everybody out there, this is Dr. Kelly Casperson. She has the podcast, You Are Not Broken, that you can find on iTunes and all the other venues out there, as well as find her website, which is kellycaspersonmd.com. For everybody else, is the Change Physician podcast. You can find us on your podcasting venues, or you can join the community at thechangephysician.com. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.